So I want to start us off talking a little bit about myself and my experience with publishing. So I'm Dr. Jeanette Laredo. At this campus, I work with faculty and I do professional development, but I was actually trained in teaching. I have a PhD in English, and my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow was going to be, teaching students at a university. That was going to be my life. It hasn't been that. So with publishing, I feel a lot of times that I have an ambivalence with it. Like there's strong positive emotions, but there's also very strong negative emotions. And because of this whole idea in academia of publish or perish, right? So what I usually do when it comes to publishing is I just kind of take whatever creative thing it is that I'm making and I kind of throw it into the ether and then I run away, right? Because I'm afraid. And then I kind of crouch down and I look and I'm like, oh, okay, so they didn't hate it, right? And then I emerge. That's kind of how I feel about publishing. And it really, the first thing I ever published in college is I wanted to do a creative writing magazine, and I did. And it had, we had the first issue, it came out, I got stands, got it printed, and I was so proud of it. There was no second edition. Because I kind of dropped it. So I think that really speaks to how we feel about publishing, right? Like we want to share our innermost selves. We want to share our unique perspective, but it's also incredibly scary to do. And that's still something that I struggle with. So just kind of keep those things in mind as you're listening to today's talk. So we have author Elsie Barlow with us this morning, and then with our online talks later on in the day, especially the last one by Alejandra is going to be about writing things that we don't want to face. And I feel like, post-COVID is, it's not over, but it's like post-snowpocalypse as well. There's a lot of emotions that are really kind of difficult to face and talk about. And I love what we were talking in our rehearsal for today. She said that not everything you write has to be published. And I thought that was really kind of insightful. And even though it kind of goes against the whole thing of this event, but it kind of got me thinking about, what we publish every day in terms of social media. Like we're publishing things constantly. If you go to my Facebook page, it's mostly mental health memes and possums for reasons, right? I also have an Instagram where I post my art and memes. Are you seeing a pattern? And it's this thing where it's like, I think publishing can easily be tied to our self-worth in a lot of ways, where it's like, oh no, I'm just doing this art and I'm putting it out. Oh wait, I got a like on my Instagram, picture. So these are kind of things to kind of keep in mind as we're thinking about publishing, self-publishing, because self-publishing can be incredibly positive. I saw this over the course of lockdown. There were teachers that were publishing all sorts of wonderful resources, but like many things, it can also be a tool for evil, like with fake news and spreading misinformation. So these are just some of the things that I want you to be thinking about as we go through our event today and tomorrow. So the event will always be physical in the morning, and there will be breakfast, and then in the afternoon we'll transition online. So I want to kind of transition to our first speaker today. So this is Elsie Barlow. She is a writer and professor of English at Dallas College, and she has been working primarily in the field of speculative fiction. Her work has been published in a variety of magazines and journals, and her horror trilogy, Pivot, Perish, and Peak, was picked up in 2018 by California Cold Blood Books, an imprint of Rare Bird Books. And today she's going to talk about a broad overview of the publishing process, multiple avenues to querying, landing an agent, establishing a base of readers, advertising, and then also self-publishing versus traditional publishing, or both. So please join me in welcoming Elsie Barlow today.
Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Good morning. Thank you so much for your wonderful introduction to Dr. Laredo. So first I want to say that I am super excited to be here and very grateful that TCC was willing to have me at this wonderful River Speaks event. And I also want to start us off with the concept of Cassandra, the Trojan priestess of Apollo in Greek mythology, who was doomed to utter true prophecies, but of course never be believed. Oftentimes when I think back on my burning desire to be published and the knowledge that the majority of people, if I had dared to share it with them, probably would not have believed in me or supported me, I often think about her. That is, I think about carrying an inner truth that will not be recognized by the outside world. And though I was incorrect about that assumption in many ways, I was also correct about it in many ways. And so I suspect that in your own heart, you may have this fear of existing as a Cassandra, of having your own inner truth not validated by the world. And if so, then your writing will likely take on a pressure to be more than just writing, but to free you from the burden of not being believed. I want you to consider, even if you are ultimately published, that such a burden is never really fully erased. Getting published may not fully remove the fear of existing as a Cassandra, but it might reduce it down 50%, and that's something. So I'm going to present to you here the things I think can reduce that burden down to 50% for you. Also, what I present here should hopefully help generate ideas for you to create your own path to publication. Keep in mind that there's no one answer and no one path. Okay. So before I get into my specific advice, I want to share with you my own history, my own path to getting an agent and getting published, just so you know my background, why I recommend what I recommend, and what my experiences are. And so this sort of starts back in 2012. In 2012, I had had an idea for a novel for about 10 years. So basically in high school is where I got this idea, and it had stuck with me. And while I was finishing up my first MA in English, I actually wrote my first book. And I did not have high hopes for getting traditionally published. I did not query. I did not seek out an agent. I simply self-published the very first draft without copy editing, without honing, without proofreading, basically what you are not supposed to do. And I was trying to model my path off of Hugh Howey's. Now, if you're not aware of Hugh Howey, he writes sci-fi novels. And what he did was he would self-publish his novel for $1, and then he would read the reviews that people had, and then alter that manuscript and re-self-publish it for $1 again. And so he was actually able to, alter his text with the feedback of readers, but also, generate a fair amount of money during this process. So that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping, to get feedback from readers and hone my novel that way. Well, it did not exactly work out that way. I really did not get a lot of feedback from readers, except for primarily about the cover. And so a lot of people complained about the cover, so I was like, okay, I will pay someone to create a better cover for me. And that's how I found Bookfly Design. And they ended up creating a really wonderful award-winning cover for my book, which was fantastic. But in addition, Kira Rubenthaler, who worked there, she said, have you considered submitting this to Indie Awards? I had no idea that Indie Awards even existed. And I was like, okay, I will do that. So I started submitting the book to awards. And I also submitted it to the Bram Stoker Awards, which is not an Indie Awards, it's a horror awards ceremony. So on top of that, I had heard of BookBub, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. It's a mailing list of millions and millions of readers, and if you apply and are accepted, you do have a potential to make, $12,000 in a day based on sales. That used to be the case. I don't know if it still is. And I was able to secure a BookBub ad for Christmas of 2012. And it ended up generating about 30,000 copies of my book being distributed. And so then I also ended up placing in or winning several of the Indie Book Awards. And on top of that, my book, surprisingly, was selected for the preliminary ballot for the Bram Stoker Awards for first novel. And I didn't really know about the Bram Stoker Awards, but it was going to be held in 2014 in Portland, Oregon. And so I flew out there. I was super nervous, but I was excited, ready to meet people, hoping to find my tribe, which I definitely did. But the first night that the convention, the World Horror Convention, was to start, I was really nervous, and I had actually booked a tour of Portland for right around that same time, because the introductory night was not going to be very big. I was standing, waiting in the lobby of the hotel, waiting on that taxi, when two people came up to me. One was Gardner Goldsmith, and one was Dallas Mayer. Dallas Mayer writes, publishes, or he used to, unfortunately, he has passed away, under Jack Ketchum, and he's a fairly well-known horror author. He invited me and Gardner to go over to the bar and have a drink. And right then my taxi pulled up, and I was like, I'd love to, but I have this taxi. So I got in the taxi, and I was realizing that I had made the incorrect choice. And I had the taxi basically just take me in a circle back to the hotel. It was $3. I paid him. I got back out, and I went to the bar. And so Dallas bought us drinks, and I let him know about my book and the 35,000 that had been distributed by that point, which I didn't realize how significant that was. And he must have told somebody else, because later on the next day, I ran into an entertainment lawyer named Wayne, who turned out to be Josh Mallerman's entertainment lawyer. Josh Mallerman wrote Bird Box, that was also turned into the Netflix movie. But Bird Box was being released that night, and Wayne invited me to go to the book release party, so I did. And it was amazing, and while we were there, we were talking, and he said, why don't you send me your book? So that night, I got on Amazon, shipped him a copy of the book. Later on, he reads it, and he read it fairly quickly in like a day or two, which is amazing in the publishing world. And he said, I just don't know if it's marketable or not, so I'm going to bring someone else in. So he brings in Ryan, who's an entertainment manager, and basically they were like, this is a mess. Like my first draft, my only draft, is a mess, and I knew it was. But I also knew that I was willing to put in whatever work it took. So they told me, in general, and I do find this to be true, books require 3 revisions before an agent, 3 revisions with an agent, and 3 revisions with a publisher. They said, your book is going to require 4 revisions before an agent. And I said, that's fine. And I got to work on it, and I got it done in 2.5. So I think I also kind of surprised them, because I was willing to sit down and put in the grunt work. So, after that happened, they said, okay, this is good. We're ready to try to find an agent. And so over the course of a year, it was sent to 4 agents. The 4th one picked it up. The first one rejected it because it was a bit too paranormal or supernatural. What she wanted was a horror novel that could also be marketed as literature, and mine could not. And that's a point of controversy, where is the dividing line between horror and literature? A lot of people don't know how to pick it out. She picked it out as not my book. But she said, I really like this, and I have a friend who's an agent who might be interested. And she sent it to her friend. Her friend read it in 24 hours, whereas the first agent took 3 months to get to my book. So that's the difference between a slush pile and a recommendation. That second agent said, this is just 2 degrees off from what I normally represent. I normally represent dark fantasy, right? And so she was like, do you have any dark fantasy ideas? And I did, and I told her one, and she loved it. And I was like, I'd prefer to, try to get this published. So we parted ways. Went to a 3rd agent, really not in his purview at all. He mainly did nonfiction books. And 4th agent, Jonathan Lyons at Curtis Brown, that's where it landed. Okay, so I had an agent, and the agent was looking at this book, which half of it was in flashback, which is the sign of a novice writer, because it means that you don't yet know how to plot, right? And you think that there's this resonance and constant flashbacks, right? So he was like, this needs to be split before we send it out to publishers. I had just done so much work on this book that I was like, I'd really rather try sending it out as is. And he said, okay. So over the course of a year, he sent it out to publishers, and the publishers came back with their responses, which was, this needs to be split. Right? And so I said, by that point, I had had a bit of a breather, and I was like, I will split it. And so I sat down, split the chapters out, and built that first book up, and got it to work, got it to snap, got it to pop. Somehow, I wasn't sure how. And he sends it out, and that's when it landed with California Cold Blood Books, who used to be an imprint of Rare Bird Books. They've since branched out on their own. So at the same time as this, happened, I knew that, I had built that first book up, somehow got it to work through trial and error. And it took 1,000 single-spaced pages to produce a 250 double-spaced page novel. And I knew I couldn't do that again, right? I kind of just wore myself out producing that first novel, trying to figure out how to make it work. So I applied to MFA programs because I was like, I need help. And I landed with several, but I ultimately accepted Stonecoast at the University of Southern Maine, which has wonderful faculty members, including Elizabeth Searle, Liz Hand, and Nancy Holder. Nancy Holder was the one who showed me the craft books that I ultimately was able to use to produce that second novel. And if she hadn't done that, I don't think I would have gotten a 3-book deal. Because she showed me them, I was able to build up that second novel a lot more efficiently. And so by the time a publisher was interested, I had 2 of 3 books written. And so that's how I got the 3-book deal instead of just a 2-book deal with an option or something like that, right? So I am immensely grateful that I ran into Nancy Holder and that she offered those craft books, and I will mention what they are in a moment, but I'm just giving you a little bit of background. So in addition to figuring out how to plot and provide a better character arc, in the MFA program, I noticed how important copy editing was. Removing the I filter, making passive sentences active, using strong verbs, eliminating unnecessary adverbs and adjectives, etc., right? And I didn't just learn this with the faculty, but I also learned this because for my graduating project, I interviewed 12 successful self-publishers and traditional publishers, including Andy Weir, David Chilton, Michael Sullivan, Molly Carroll, Jean Yoakum, Michael Paolini, etc. Okay? And they all said, don't trust a small publisher to put in the money to have your book copy edited. That's probably gonna land on you to do that. And I, of course, earmarked that since basically all of them said it. And I was like, I'm going to get these books copy edited, whatever my publisher decides. And so I actually sought my own copy editor. I sought Sue Ducarmi. She and I just worked really well together. And in the process of copy editing that first book, without removing a single sentence, we reduced it down by 30,000 words. And that's simply removing the I filter, making all of those sentences stronger, etc. So it was a magical process. A lot of people have really negative experiences, but for me, it was great. So then, in addition, in terms of the cover design, my publisher really liked that award-winning cover that had been created by Bookfly Design, so we ended up working with them again. And they created this new sort of, revamped version of that cover, as well as 2 more covers that were in the same theme. And they were also, and this leads me to my next point, they were able to work with the audiobook company, so that way the audiobook company could use those images as well. So about 8 months after I signed the 3-book deal, my publisher was able to get an audiobook contract, something not even on my radar, I was not expecting it, with Brilliance Audio. And originally, Brilliance Audio wanted to offer a contract for all 3 books every 10 years for $9,000. The average pay for audiobooks is about $3,000 per book. So I showed Wayne, that original entertainment lawyer, the contract that was being offered, and he was like, well, actually the average is every 7 years and it's per book. So we're going to renegotiate. And so they did that. Brilliance was willing to do every 7 years per book. And so that worked out. Bringing us up to date, I have fortunately been able to get a lot of really great reviews for the trilogy. Pivot has been lauded by ALA Book List and Publishers Weekly, and it received a fantastic review from Kirkus and was featured in the July 2021 Kirkus Review issue. And when they selected Pivot, they let me know that only about 15% of indie books that they review are featured. So I didn't even know that this was possible, but I was extremely grateful for it. In addition, Publishers Weekly, who will be releasing their review of Parrish this year in their November 8th issue, notified me that Parrish is an editor's pick. So that's, really fantastic. Pivot is in a lot of Texas Barnes and Nobles now. And I've also been able to get many blurbs from Josh Mallerman, Weston Oakes, Yvonne Navarro, Rena Mason, Eric Gignard, and a variety of other people. My books have also placed as a finalist and won several awards. And then in terms of advertising, of course, I have done basically everything that I can think of, from radio ads to contacting libraries. I contacted about 3,000 libraries each time one of my books was published. And that is a norm. You should get used to that concept. I reached out to, I would say, hundreds and hundreds of reviewers and shipped books to many of them. And I've done radio ads with WRR, which can be really lucrative and cannot be, right? It's very hit and miss. And then a BookBub ad as well. And so, these are my experiences in terms of advertising. I still have the same agent. So that's Jonathan Lyons at Curtis Brown. And I do have another book with him intended to be a dark fantasy duology. And I'm also working on another book. And so that's pretty much my background. I'll also bring you back to the fact that I interviewed those 12 self-published and traditionally published authors. And so some of my advice is coming from them as well and what they recommend. Okay. So that was my background. Now here's my advice. The first thing, of course, is that you need to get the story down on paper, and this can drive you absolutely insane. And that's because you don't necessarily have it down yet, right? And many authors actually experience writing their second book is a lot tougher than writing their first, because their first was done through trial and error. They somehow got it to work. They're not exactly sure how. They're not sure how to reduplicate that process. And so it can be tough. Now, Nancy Holder, one of the faculty members at Stonecoast, but also just a phenomenal writer. She's novelized many books, such as the new Wonder Woman movie, well, the first Wonder Woman movie that was new. The all-female Ghostbusters. She wrote for Buffy the Vampire Slayer for quite a few years. She says that there are 2 craft books that she uses for every book that she writes. And those 2 craft books are Save the Cats by Blake Snyder and The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And these books have beat sheets in them. So Save the Cat has the 15 beats, and The Writer's Journey has 12 for the hero's journey, right? And so when she told us this, I took Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, I looked at the beat sheet, I compared it with my first book that I had somehow been able to make work, and I found that 13 of the 15 beats lined up. And so I was like, oh, that's what I did, right? Oh, that's why it worked. And so that's how I was able to more efficiently build up that second book, because now I had more of a roadmap, more of an idea of what I was doing. Nancy says that it's one thing to write one book, it's another thing to write many. And so you don't want to be stuck in a position where it's taking you 3,000 single-spaced pages to produce a novel, especially if your agent is saying, where's your next one, right? What do you have that you can give us now? Or what can you get us quickly? And that is something that they will ask. Publishers, agents tend to want more, right? So that being said, the process also needs to be organic. So I wouldn't say, that that's all you need, that these beat sheets are all you need. But they come under a lot of criticism. And I think, to reject a roadmap for the very fact that it's a roadmap is a bit insane. So I do highly recommend those books in order to produce. Next thing that I want to advise you on is to keep an open mind. So if you are working with industry professionals who you trust, I do recommend if they say try X to actually try X. So remember, that first book that I wrote, they wanted me to split it. At first I didn't want to, but then I did. When I was in the master class at Stone Coast, Elizabeth Searle said that she had a student who was in the same position as me. And she had a book that went back and forth between past and present. And her agent was like, you need to split this, and she refused to, and she lost the publishing contract. And years down the road, as she was looking back on it, she was like, I should have split the book. It would have made the book better. And it can be really amazing when you try something that someone suggests and it works and it makes the book work. Also keep in mind that you have every version of every book that you write already in your pocket. It's already saved, you have it. So why not try something new? Why not create a new version and compare it to what you had before and see which one works better, right? Okay, so also keep in mind it's a marathon. After you have the book down, and you have edited the ideas according to the advice that you trust, you then need to polish and maybe even copy edit it, perhaps even before you send it to an agent. And that's because it will stand out as better writing in comparison with other manuscripts. And also keep in mind that this is a good idea because if you end up with a small publisher, that small publisher might want to publish your book as is with no copy editing, which can decrease the quality. So if you have only ever submitted a copy edited manuscript, you know that they're not going to have a version of that novel that's not copy edited, right? So that's important to keep in mind. And then the third thing is that, and this is something the entertainment manager told me, which is that you can only enter a room for the first time once. And so that's also true for agents. And you want to provide the best possible version of your manuscript for an agent because that's the first time that they're entering the room. And they can only enter it for the first time once. And beyond that, their objectivity tends to go down, right? So you want to get that book to as high of a quality as you can. The next thing is that you need to let the process take the time that it needs to. So don't rush to the point that you are stampeding over good ideas that would have improved the book. Let the book force you to sit down and be with it. Let everything simmer, let the flavors come out. One of the powers of writing is that a reader is sitting down for 8 to 15 hours and reading that which took thousands of hours to create. That's the POW factor. All right, so let it take thousands of hours to create. Don't rush. All right. Also, I want you to keep in mind genres that sell, what will sell. Not to try to force you to write in those genres, but so that you don't beat yourself up. So let's say that you are writing in a genre that does not have a lot of audience members, right? Not a lot of readers. That means that you are less likely to get an agent and less likely to be published and less likely to sell copies. And that's just because of the numbers, right? So also keep in mind that someone who wrote a book of less quality, that was, for instance, a thriller or romance, which are very high-selling genres, they might sell 3,000 copies that first month, They're published simply because they have that wider audience base. And so, you know, thinking back to that first agent that rejected my book because it couldn't be marketed as both literature and horror, it makes sense to me, right? Especially as I get older. And it's because if she's used to marketing to both and half of her audience has been eliminated, that is far fewer sales, right? So the top selling genres, romance makes about 1.5 billion a year, probably higher than that by now. Thrillers make half that, 750 million. And then you start decreasing as you go through the other genres. So, you know, just keep that in mind. So that way you don't beat yourself up when a book you've been working 3 years on doesn't end up with an agent, doesn't end up with a publisher. It might be because you're writing in a very low audience level genre, right? Okay. So now I want to get into the benefits of self-publishing versus traditional publishing that I've experienced. The best thing about self-publishing was being able to keep my book at a low price. And that was because it decreased the roadblocks, any roadblocks between me and my reader. There was very little, you know, there separating them from being able to get a copy. And as a result of that, I was also able to secure multiple BookBub ads, which is even more difficult to do now. And BookBub ads were what vaulted my self-published version of Pivot to 65,000 copies distributed, with about 200 per month without any ads, you know, being distributed. If that hadn't happened to me, I never would have been noticed at my first World Horror Convention in Portland in 2014. It's because I had that basis of readers that was able to happen, that platform, right? That being said, benefits of traditional publishing are very plentiful that I've experienced. It's more acceptable in terms of prestige. It's accepted and lauded by my college. I was able to secure that traditional audiobook contract and also have a fantastic voice actress for all 3 books, Emma Galvin, who also voiced the Divergent series. You know, I have fortunately also had reviews by ALA Booklist, Kirkus, and Publishers Weekly, blurbs from Josh Mellerman and the others that I mentioned. It's been picked up at, you know, Barnes & Noble and many indie bookstores. It's the top selling book of my publisher, you know, featured in Kirkus, Editor's Pick for Publishers Weekly. And I'm also able to contact 3,000 libraries each time a book is published, which I wouldn't have necessarily been able to do if I had self-published, because libraries like ordering from their particular supplier every time. So say that they like Baker & Taylor, right? Then they make a list of all the books that they want to order from Baker & Taylor. If you don't have a book with Baker & Taylor, you're not going to get ordered, simply because they like to stick with their supplier a lot of the time. So, you know, that opened that up for me. And so, but in addition, why else might you choose self-publishing? So I have a list of some things here for you to think about. You don't want to share royalties or take on the huge task of actually becoming a publisher. You will have more control over the final product, the book cover and copy editing. You can fire the copy editor if need be or not use the cover. Some publishers can't do as good of a job as you, and you end up doing a lot of the work anyway. So if that's the case, and you know you're going to rely on yourself mainly, then self-publishing is an option. If you're not happy with your publisher and you want to take back control, you can attempt to gain your rights to your books back and self-publish instead. Lots of the authors that I interviewed did that, right? Maybe you're like Andy Weir and you couldn't break in. And so he ended up serializing his novel on his website because he wasn't able to break in. And then that's how it ended up spreading. And so you could choose self-publishing if that's the case. Andy Weir notes that the nice things about self-publishing is that there's low financial risk and there's no old boy network between you and your readers, right? You could also potentially be like David Chilton, who he self-published The Wealthy Barber, which sold 2 million copies. The reason why he chose to self-publish was because he knew that this had potential to bulk sell to companies, and publishers did not know how to do that, right? So he knew that he was going to have to do a lot of the legwork. Why would he want to split royalties with people that didn't know how to bulk sell to companies, right? All right, why would you maybe want to choose traditional publishing? So Andy Weir does note that, he sold 35,000 copies of The Martian via Kindle after people asked him to put it in Kindle after it was serialized. But after that, Random House took over and the numbers went way up because you're opening up those distribution avenues that were not there before. You also might choose traditional publishing if you're still a novice and you don't yet have down a lot of the tiny little things about your industry that you should know. So for instance, if you don't know, for instance, in the romance genre, each scene needs to be at least 10 pages long, or you don't know what head hopping is, or you don't know that the average word count for a horror novel is 75,000 words, and to veer too far above or below that means that you are less likely to be purchased. These are things that you might figure out if you were to go and traditionally publish. So little things, right? Also, maybe like Shannon Johnstone, who self-published Landfill Dogs, you become aware that if you self-publish but you work in an academic place like a college, you won't be lauded for the book as well as you would be if you were traditionally published. That tends to be true. And the other thing is that Michael Sullivan notes that even though traditional publishing can be just as much vanity press as self-publishing, it can nevertheless be a great business deal, right? He said that he took hundreds of thousands of dollars in a loss in order to transition from self-publishing to traditional. But he tripled his fan base in the process because those books now had multiple distribution avenues, including audiobooks, hardback, paperback, etc. And so, so he notes that at the very least, the money ended up coming out the same, if not making just a little bit more in terms of traditional publishing. If you do self-publish, you should research multiple publishing platforms. Don't just go to CreateSpace because it's the most well-known. Also look at Smashwords, look at Blurb. Jean Yoakum states that there are times where the sites beyond Amazon are outselling her Amazon site. So you may want to make sure that your book is everywhere. Also make sure to create a professional book cover and copy edit it and proofread it. People do indeed judge a book by its cover, Michael Paolini notes, so you should make sure that your book's cover is professional and stands out from the rest. And then if you do go the traditional route and you're attempting to find an agent, I personally actually don't recommend querying. I don't recommend querying agents. I recommend going to writing conventions. You're going to meet agents, lawyers, editors, publishers, reviewers, readers, right, at those conventions. They tend to all go to the bar after the con is over. Go talk to them, make friends, discuss what you're passionate about, right? Anne Rice actually said that that's sort of how she got her agent because she took a workshop at a writing convention. And that's how I ended up with my agent, was through the connections that I made there. So my recommendation is to do that. Also take note that if you are submitting to a smaller publisher, you may not even need an agent. My own publisher kind of went back and forth on requiring agented or unagented submissions, and a lot of small publishers don't require an agent. In addition, Rob Dirks, who writes sci-fi, he was able to get an advance from Audible for several book ideas he had because he voiced his own audiobooks. He put them, on Audible, and they were selling really well. And so Audible actually contacted him and said, hey, do you have any other ideas for any future projects? He said he wrote a couple sentences for about 4 or 5 projects, submitted it to them, and within a month he had an advance check. He didn't have an agent, right? His book was just doing well, right? His books were. You can also, though, if you self-publish and your numbers are really high, you can take those numbers to an agent. And that's what Michael Sullivan did. In terms of Andy Weir and Christopher Paolini, once they got the numbers, the agents came to them, and sometimes that happens as well. But you can reverse that. You can go to an agent and say, look at these numbers, and do you want to partner with us or with me, right? All right, if you get a traditional publishing contract, it's okay to land with a small publisher or boutique publisher, because even if you land with the top 5, they won't necessarily publish more than one book by you. So Josh Mellerman shared this story at one of the horror conventions where he was talking with HarperCollins, who published his first book, Bird Box. And he had several other stories that he had written, and HarperCollins straight up told him, we will not publish more than one book every at least 2 years by you, right? So he looked at his stack of 20 manuscripts and he was like, that's 40 years right there that I'd have to be waiting. So he actually sought out small publishers, because even with a movie deal with Netflix, he would not be published by HarperCollins any more than one book every 2 years or more than that, right? Also, remember that a small publisher may not have the funds to advertise or copy edit, and you're going to have to step in. I know one author on Facebook who says he has spent $80,000 over many years on social media ads, but he says that it's paid off, that it's generated enough sales, I guess, to at least break even or, generate more income than that. And his books do tend to sell really well, and he is self-published. So, that's something to keep in mind. I will say that for my own self, that I did pay for the Kirkus reviews, which are expensive, and I did pay for the Publishers Weekly reviews beyond Pivot. And I went back and forth on it because they are not cheap. But I ultimately decided that I would put the money forward because I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how many books I will ultimately publish. And so I wanted to put my all in. And as a result, as I said before, Pivot was featured in Kirkus, and Publishers Weekly chose Parrish as an editor's pick, right? And I didn't even know that was possible, but it was because I was willing to lean towards doing the most possible that happened. Okay. Also remember that I paid for copy editing. And you may be more likely to get an audiobook contract with a traditional publisher, with an excellent artist. And if you're with a traditional publisher, you're more likely to be able to get library suppliers. And you will be posted on NetGalley in order to generate those preliminary reviews. So I don't know how much NetGalley actually costs if you are a single writer, self-publishing. I don't know how much it costs to get into that. Whichever route you choose, of course, you're going to have to market. And the best way to market is to write another book. You should also take a holistic marketing approach. So, advertising, blog posting, social media, review solicitations, publicity, events, and email list building, contacting libraries and bookstores. This is interesting. David Chilton actually said that he did not advertise at all on social media or anywhere. What he did was he did 2,000 interviews over the course of 5 to 7 years. And that was what generated interest in the book. So he did not even, do anything aside from interviewing. In terms of Andy Weir, he was able to generate interest because when he serialized his novel online, it got around by word of mouth. So, that's an option. Jean Yoakum notes that in order to get, more publishing avenues for her books, she actually tracks down translators on Craigslist in order to translate those books into multiple languages. And she said she has been burned a couple of times by translators on Craigslist. But for the most part, once she finds a good one, she can work with that person on all future projects. And so she's able to, with, one book, find multiple purchasing outlets based on that idea. And that's also why you have ebook, audiobook, paperback. You want those multiple avenues for one product. You can also do something like yoga retreats that Molly Carroll does, where you do yoga and meditation, and then like the attendees also buy the book. That's pretty powerful, she says. And then just also keep in mind that the marketing you do needs to be full-time. So, David Chilton notes that you really have to be at it daily. This is something that you are living, right? So the question is it possible to succeed? And the answer is yes. That's the resounding answer from all of the individuals who I interviewed, as well as from myself. If you have grit, perseverance, are willing to work hard enough, and willing to live it. So it's not like a full-time job or part-time job, it's a lifestyle. Things that you should not do. Don't immediately sign a contract without having someone look it over. Andy Weir says that that is exactly what he did, and it took a lot of maneuvering to get things back to the way that they were supposed to be. Also, Michael Sullivan accidentally signed away his audiobook rights, and his wife calculated how much money was lost as a result of that, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, have at least one lawyer look it over, 2 lawyers, right? But don't just sign something. Also, don't split books to create cliffhangers. So don't take one book and hope to generate more income from your readers by then splitting it into 3 different books and having them buy each one. And then finally, also write multiple books before you start advertising. So that way the money you put towards that advertising ends up generating more profit. If you're just putting money towards advertising one book, you're not going to get very far, right? But if you say you have 3 books or 5 books, right, especially if they're in the same series, then you're generating a lot more income per dollar that you're spending on advertising. Don't just sit and wait for your big break. You don't want to waste your time. Make sure that you keep writing and writing and writing. And don't assume your book will sell with no advertising, with no work on your part. Don't overlook the promotion side, and don't get hung up on negative reviews. Personally, I don't even read reviews of my books unless I take a day where I sit down and I read them all, and then I'm done. And then I leave that and I kind of wrap it up and put it on the shelf until a later time. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. If there's an agent or a publishing house that you love, that you respect, or an author, do not be afraid to reach out to them. Don't be afraid to use your connections, and Molly Carroll says this. Make sure that you have a quality product out there so that way you're not completely ignored or attacked online. Michael Sullivan notes that. David Chilton says that you should adapt to the times. So if shorter novels are selling better, be willing to try writing a shorter novel, right? Novellas may be the way of the future. And then also keep in mind that the devil's in the details. So there's a lot of little things, where the acknowledgments go, where the dedication page goes, what the back cover should look like, etc., that you should do correctly, that you should make sure you put in time to do. Okay. All right. So that pretty much sums up everything that I am going to be able to bring you. I hope that something here is useful and will pave your publishing path with a bit more ease. And I also just want to bring us back to that idea of Cassandra that I brought up at the beginning, the priestess who knows the future, but who no one believes, and how it feels similar to no one believing in your dream to be published. I just want to note that it's okay if no one believes you. The future you know is your own, and it doesn't ultimately matter if others agree with you, disagree, believe, or don't believe. All that matters is you know. Thank you so much for sticking through to the end. Also, once again, I'm very, very grateful for being here at River Speaks. Thank you so much.
A lot of really good advice there. So believe in yourself and go to the bar. Got it. So if we have any questions, we do have time for that. If anybody has any questions to ask, just raise your hand and I'll pop over with a microphone.
Sure.
Can you break down the length of the whole process of publishing from when you submit to the various stages?
Sure. They say that the average book on the bookshelf took 5 years from first draft to publication. That's an average, right? So, people who already have an agent, it might be a little bit quicker for them. People who already have a publisher, if that publisher is willing to publish something else, it could be 3 years, right? For me, from working with Wayne and Ryan to the book deal, it was 4 years, and then another year before it was on shelf, so 5. Interesting. It was 5 years. Yeah.
What about when you self-publish? Do you think that's a faster process, possibly?
It was much faster simply because I did it wrong. If you do it correctly, I could see it taking 2 to 3 years. If you are getting creative edits from, like, for instance, I've done a creative edit with Sue. So she has to take a few months to look at the book, get the notes back to me, I revise, and then copy editing. And then if you want a solid cover, you're going to have to work with a place like Bookfly Design. That's going to take several months as well. But you could do that at the beginning to where you don't have to wait on it too long. So I would say around 2 years. I could see that.
Okay, then one last question. Do you recommend any specific software?
I only use Microsoft Word, but there is Scrivener. Is it Scrivener? I think has been recommended for writers. It can do a lot more in terms of separating out chapters. It actually never deletes your work. And so even when you delete it, they're aware that writers tend to delete things that they shouldn't be deleting. And so you can always go back and get that work again. You can also, I think, navigate the book by character. And so I think it's just probably built better, Scrivener. And so I would check that one out. But I just use Word.
One more question, actually.
Yeah. Sure.
You mentioned there was 2 books that were recommended. One was The Cat, something I didn't write down.
Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. The title of the book is based on the very first thing we need to see the main character do, which is save somebody or do something to where we can get behind them, right? And the second one is The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. That was based on the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell talked about in Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he analyzed mythology and just stories from all different cultures and found this one common theme of the hero's journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I was wondering, for someone just starting out, do you have any experience publishing short fiction, or did you publish any short fiction before you went with your full-length novels?
That's a great question. I personally have not really delved into short fiction. I mean, my first publication where I was paid pro rate was flash fiction, and I did recently have a short story published, but it doesn't call to me like long fiction does. I think there's not enough time to get into the characters, and then once you get into them, they're gone. And so, like, I don't tend to write short fiction, and I also, but I've seen it done well. So maybe, we'll see in the future.